Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Let's do a little bit more Storycraft today. We are going to talk about tragedies. I write tragedies. I have a couple in these new books, Afterglow and Al Shafalda, which I'll talk about in a minute. In my wider circle, my Twitter circle, and lots of my subscribers, there's been some criticism about downer endings. Can we stop having downer endings? Why do people like tragedy? I want happy endings, and there's nothing wrong with wanting happy endings or being tired of constant downer endings that you may get from like the current phase of literature or media in general. However, I will push back on the tragedy. Why would anyone like tragedy? And because I write tragedies, that people like tragedies for many reasons, and we shouldn't shy away from tragedy. So the first one, why do people like tragedies? And the reason is because they provide an emotional high, just like the same reason people like horror movies. Why would anyone want to go to the movies and feel scared? Why would you want to go see an alien movie and feel scared all the time? Well, that fear produces an emotional high. It's different from the emotional high of a tragedy, which produces an emotional high of sadness, or in a lot of cases, a cathartic sadness. So people enjoy the cathartic sadness that they get from watching a real tragedy. And the other reason is that tragedy reveals and how shall I put this? It has a lot of themes that have to do with humanity, the nature of humanity, and the nature of humanity in the fallen world. So it says important things. It displays important things about the human condition. That's why people enjoy tragedy. That's why I enjoy tragedy. That's why I like writing tragedies. This is actually a classic tragedy in 5 acts, but it's a fantasy novel. And there are tragedies in this one, which came out just the other week, Afterglow Generation Y. This is a collection of short stories. But lots of them are going to either be tragic or have a tragic feel to them. But there's also actually a lot of happy endings in this book. I was very careful to not have nothing but downer endings because, again, nothing wrong with feeling like I'm exhausted from downer endings. I have a lot of positive endings that happen in this book as well. Now, what I want to say also about tragedy, besides why do people like it? Why should we have tragedies? Why should we write them? Why should we read them? Well, we want to read them because they reveal important things about human nature and about the status of humanity. And we should write them because we want to express those themes as well. But let me make a point about what tragedy is. Very often, people put all things with downer endings in the category of tragedy, and classically, that's not really the case. So the classic definition of a tragedy is a story about a noble character suffering a downfall, usually due to some sort of flaw. What we call a tragic flaw. So a tragic hero is a noble character. He suffers some kind of downfall, and it's usually due to a flaw. A movie about a child who gets cancer and dies is not really a tragedy unless you were somehow able to make an auxiliary character into the tragic hero, like the parent. The parent is suffering a downfall because they're unable to deal with the loss of the child or something like that. So just if you write a story about a kid getting cancer and dying, that's a sad story, but it's not really a tragedy in the classic sense, and doesn't really say anything deep about the human condition. So when we talk about the consequences of a character suffering a downfall due to a flaw, we're usually talking about the consequences of sin. And this is why tragedies tend to expound these themes about the human condition. So what is a noble character? A noble character usually means not just a character that's likable, not a character that's innocent like a child, but a character who has virtue, a character who you can appreciate because of their noble attitudes and their moral standing. And when they suffer a downfall, they lose something. They lose their wealth, they lose their status, they lose their power. But most often they suffer a moral downfall, and they suffer a physical downfall as a result of their moral failings. That's the tragic flaw. So the tragic flaw is some misdirected passion in most cases that causes them to do bad things, make bad decisions, which cause them to have bad consequences. You have to think that in terms of the way human passions work, is human passions, when directed towards the good, are good, and when they're misaligned, they cause problems. A great example is actually a tragedy that's in the Bible. That's the story of Samson the judge. Samson the judge, who's a a Nazirite from birth. He's never cut his hair. He's completely dedicated to God. When he's a warrior for God's people, he's unstoppable. He is superhuman. The Holy Spirit comes upon him, and he is able to kill hordes of people single-handedly. With the bone of an ass, I made asses of them. With the donkey's jaw, I slew 1,000 men. What causes Samson's downfall, though? It is a woman. It is his inability to say no to women. In other words, it's his lust that causes his downfall, where he ends up being with a woman and trusting a woman he knows he shouldn't trust, but because he's infatuated with her, because she's beautiful, because of the lust he has for her, he ends up trusting her when he knows he shouldn't, and it causes him to be captured, have his eyes put out. And then there's an interesting ending to Samson's story too, which is that he's able to call upon God for one last burst of strength to kill all the Philistines around him, and that's at the end of the story. So he does suffer a tragic end, but he's redeemed a little bit at the end, which to me is not a complete downer ending. That's a tragedy, but there's some redemption with that tragedy as well, and that I think is a good way to end a tragedy. So what is lust? Lust is a misdirected passion. Passion correctly ordered towards the good, towards your spouse, producing children, you and your spouse growing closer together, building a firm life, imparting virtue to your children, making each other more virtuous, bringing each other closer to heaven. These are things which are properly ordered passions, right? When Samson's passion towards for his people, for the Israelite people, is properly ordered, he does amazing things. When his passions are ordered towards lust, he suffers a downfall. And this is the case with most tragedies that you are going to see. And everybody that's watching has watched at least one tragedy, I'm sure. The Star Wars prequels are tragedies. There's about the tragic downfall of Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader, and he suffers because of a tragic flaw. What's his flaw? He has too much attachment and he does not trust. So he tries to save the person he loves. In other words, it's a misdirected passion. It's a passion that's disordered, that causes him to step across into the dark side and start doing evil things in order to get something that he wants and values above the good, above the order of the galaxy even. So that's the tragic downfall of Darth Vader, and it's a very classic tragedy. It's exactly the kind of tragedy that I end up writing in Al-Shafalva, which is really about the tragedy of wanting the impermanent to be permanent and being infatuated to the point where you will destroy yourself because of that infatuation. That's what this one's really about. If you watch something like The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, or read it, but really it's a play, so I guess you should watch it. The tragic hero is really Brutus, and Brutus suffers a downfall because in his zeal to protect Mos Maiorum, to protect the way of the ancestors from Caesar, the ambitious Caesar, he commits a horrible crime. So what is his tragic flaw? It is thinking that the ends justify the means. What is his misdirected passion? What is his disordered passion? Passion for the way of the ancestors, but he violates the way of the ancestors and commits violence in the Senate in order to supposedly preserve the Republic, and unwittingly sets the Roman Republic on the inevitable path towards autocratic imperial rule that would be seized under Caesar's adopted son, Augustus. So the downfall of Brutus is really thinking that the ends justify the means, that he can do some kind of good with evil. He is otherwise a noble character. He's noble in that he's upright and moral. What's his moral attitude? I want to preserve the way of the ancestors and the Roman Republic against people who would usurp it and make themselves king. That is noble, but it causes him to do something that is evil in order to acquire that goal. That is really the heart of a tragedy. So you can have a tragedy take many forms. It could be somebody who's very good and they use drugs because of a flaw where they can't handle. Maybe it's if we're going to write a tragedy about a rock star, right? He's a talented musician, but he's very stressed and he's afraid of people judging him, and he starts using drugs in order to overcome his anxiety, and then he becomes addicted to the drugs and his body breaks down because of it. And then of course his career fails because he has to use the drugs instead of paying attention to the music. This is like every rock biopic probably ever. Biopic, or is it biopic or biopic? You guys tell me in the comments. I've never heard anyone say it out loud. So you can tell me how we should actually be pronouncing biopic or biopic. I don't know. You tell me. So I dropped a book. All right, so that's the heart of tragedy. Then that's really why we should write tragedy and why we should read tragedy, is because it says something important about the human condition. And I have a lot of that kind of stuff in this book, Afterglow, but in a lot of these, the tragic downfall sometimes has a little bit of a hope at the end. I don't want people to leave a story feeling completely hopeless, but rather to have the sadness, the cathartic release from the sadness, to see the theme that I'm trying to expound about human nature and the influence of sin on us, and then to have a hope for redemption, because that's really part of my outlook too, is that no matter how bad things get, there's always a chance to change the path that you're on. There's always a chance to turn around. There's always a chance for redemption. There's always a chance for things to get better, no matter how bad they are. And that's part of the catharsis of understanding your own mistakes, is to say, okay, I made a mistake, it caused me negative consequences, but there's hope that I can repair that mistake and have a good future as well. So not all tragedies even have to have a sad ending where somebody dies or something like that. There can be a hopeful ending. What's important is that you're really showing the negative consequences of bad moral decisions and flaws. That's the heart of classic tragedy. So anyway, leave me your thoughts down below. Go ahead and grab Afterglow, Generation Y, and of course my classic tragedy written in 5 acts, All Shafalda. This came out in October. Would love for more people to read it. I've gotten some good feedback on it. Some people that really liked it and thought this is like a really weird use of elves. In this one, the devil is a woman. And of course, if you're going to make a deal with the devil, it's probably going to end in tragedy. And in fact, there's going to be an irony to that kind of tragedy. So there's another one, just tragic irony. Really, that should be its own video. Tragic irony is where, you make a deal with the devil. You think you're going to get A, but instead you don't get A and you lose what you gave to the devil. That's a bit of tragic irony. Something like Der Freischütz, where you make a deal with the devil and the last bullet ends up shooting the woman you love of your magic bullets, so that in order to get her, you needed the magic bullets, but when you used the magic bullets, it got rid of the thing that you loved, that sort of stuff. So anyway, let me know what you think down below in the comments about tragedies. I enjoyed them, but I totally get the perspective of like, hey, I want something that's not a big downer ending for once. Can we do that? I totally understand that, and it's okay to want something other than tragedy sometimes, but it's good to actually enjoy tragedies. So take it easy, and I will see you all next time.